anyone's face, so please just bear with me. But one of the great things that is possible with a flipped class is the amount of accommodation that you are able to do, because you should be differentiating for every student, regardless of whether you're in a flipped class or not. So my first question is, how many people have students with IEPs or 504s? Okay, every hand should be up. If you don't have, if you don't know what they are, first, an IEP is an individualized education plan, and it's for students who are identified with learning disabilities of some sort. A 504 plan is similar to that. It's just documentation that the student has a difficulty in a particular area. I am of the belief that every student should have individualized education, whether or not they are tagged LD, learning disabled. You know, the way I learn is not the same way that you learn, and I want to work with teachers or professors or whoever or other educators that are willing to meet my learning style. We should be doing the same for our students. And if we're expected to meet those needs, what are some of the ways that we've been meeting those needs till now? Like, what are some of the big accommodations that are made in classrooms? Anyone, just go ahead and shout them out, and I'll repeat them for...
Modified testing.
Okay, modifying testing. How would you modify testing?
Perhaps if you were giving a multiple choice question test, you might whittle it down from four to three choices.
Okay, so taking limiting the choices between testing, so like you said, going from 4 to 3. What else could you do?
Putting framework around sentences for ELL learners.
Okay, so for ESL or ELL, putting framework around the sentences and helping them learn the reading part of the grammar. I'm going to touch on the reading a lot more.
Good.
Read the test. Someone reads the test to them.
Okay, so we could have a reader for a test. Okay, and a reader,
Extended time.
Extended time for tests. Okay, yeah.
Use of manipulatives, formula charts with pictures, extra time for testing.
That's a good one. I haven't heard that one before. So using manipulatives, so students have trouble spatially. How can they read a diagram or picture a graph if they don't have some way to manipulate? That's a really good one. I haven't thought of it that way. Others?
Note takers.
Note takers, scribes. How many? Does anyone have scribes for students? Okay. So having another professional come in, a special ed professional or some sort of aide come in to take their notes. Does anyone have any hearing or sight disabled students? So having Braille provided for the blind students or having interpreters, sign language interpreters for those hard of hearing students. Those are things obviously that you individually cannot necessarily meet unless you have formal training in sign language or something like that. Those aren't the kind of accommodations that I'm talking about today. Those are definitely. I am not a special educator. I am not. Professing to be a special educator in any means. A lot of my stuff I made up on the fly because it helped my kids. And that's more what I'm going to give you today. Rather than kind of the big things that are done. So, mastery learning, I know John and Aaron talk about this a lot, but I also run a mastery class for my general chemistry. And so again, just to kind of refresh, on that, each student is working at their own pace. That means the slower learners, the faster learners, and everything in between. And the teacher's job, and this is kind of my soapbox, I guess, as I've developed all of this stuff, is that you are creating meaning of the content through the context of the class. Okay, so content, I've talked about this before. Content is not isolated to a specific lesson, right? Content is not isolated to one little boxed idea. Your class is the context in which you are teaching the content. So the way I teach international relations is different in science. It's very academic. It's very formal than I would in a humanities class where social networking is becoming a huge part of culture. We're going to approach those from two different directions. It's the same content, but we're putting them into two different lights. And that's really, really important. To be able to do, whether you're in a flipped class, whether you're in a mastery class, whether you're in a traditional class. The kids are not really going to grab onto the information until they can put it into the context of the course and they can see the meaning in it. And there are certain things that we can do as far as accommodations if we're thinking about it through that light. So in terms of that, so let's pretend for a moment that you flipped your classes. We've got all this extra time. Kids are not just working on worksheets and you're not talking for 45 minutes of your class. What are some different things besides those major accommodations that you could start to throw in to get differentiation better? Big question.
Use of multimedia.
Okay.
Auditory and visual learners.
Sure, multimedia, really hitting those audio-video people. Yeah, just go ahead and start shouting them out.
Having more ways for students to demonstrate their understanding.
Good, good. Demos. So demonstration of understanding. So whether that's formative or summative or just some sort of supplementary project that they do to get into their learning stuff.
Actual dialogue time.
Yeah, dialoguing is really good too. I've had some really good discussions. So for those kids who necessarily aren't strong writers or aren't strong readers, I know they know it because they can talk about it. And now I have chance to assess them that way that I normally wouldn't have. Any others? It's a very broad question. We're not looking to make an exhaustive list here, but hopefully your brain will start to think or to turn a little bit more in that direction. What things that I've wanted to be able to do can I now do now that I've got this extra time? In my particular case, well, I'm jumping ahead. I don't want to jump too far. How about, well, we just kind of talked about what new things. How about this? How about how about some of those bigger accommodations that are made, how can some of those change a little bit? So how would you be able to work with that blind student, let's say? Or how would you be able to work with that deaf student?
The captioning for the videos that you're creating.
Okay, good. Video captioning. There's no one captioning your lectures, right? It's all coming from the signing for that interpreter. And if you're a fast talker, like John or Aaron, they're going to have a hard time, and that student might be missing some things. And we don't know until they tell us, but it's something that's a concern. But now video captioning, they can watch it, they can read it, and they can pause and back it up if they miss something.
What would you do with the blind student?
With the blind, I would probably focus a lot more on textiles, giving them different textures and trying to link a texture to an idea. Because from my experience, I haven't worked with blind students, but I've had friends who are blind, and they tell me that if they can get some sort of other sense that is a very, very strong indicator of a particular idea. So looking at a texture, in particular lessons, some chemical reactions might have a certain smell. So if we do a demo like that, they can link the smell. Smell is your strongest sense for memory. Right? If they can link something like that, and you know, a lot of this is a lot of that other outside work that does take other time to do, but now that I have that extra time, it's not going to be as hard to do. But again, it would depend on the student, whatever their learning style is too. But yeah, I've been fortunate in the sense that I haven't had any major accommodations like that I've had. So I'm not fortunate, but
well, generally we have in some of those cases paraprofessional help as well.
Yeah,
and they can script and they can do those types of things.
Right. Is anyone here a special educator by chance? I had one yesterday when I did this. Okay. Yeah, and so like you said, there are paraprofessionals out there. You obviously again, I'm not an expert. We are experts in our field. And if it's not special ed, we're not expected to be able to just design that on the fly. There's a lot of teamwork that goes into it. So again, I just want you to be thinking in this framework. What have I been doing? How can that change? And what can I do now because of that going through that process? So multiple intelligences, we've already hit on this for a couple minutes ago. I am a kinesthetic, logical, and visual person. I like to see it. I was a biology major in college. I don't know why I went into, well, I know why I went into chemistry, but I was a biology person. I like dissections, I like touching things, I like feeling things. I liked doing it. So some of my favorite units when I student taught biology, I was doing like the physiology part of it. So we were getting kids in blood pressure cuffs, having them do jumping jacks. Or something, jump rope or something like that, and then we throw it back on. We take blood pressure readings, heart rate, pulse, things like that, because that's the way I learned, and so I can hit those kinesthetic kids who need that physical interaction. Logical scientists join. I mean, there's no more I need to say about that. And then visually, again, I like looking at diagrams. And my textbooks in college, I would annotate in the book on the diagram, and then go back and link it to the text. I wouldn't just be able to sit and read my book. In my flipped class, those logical kids, they're the ones who like to see the data and the charts and the graphs, so I provide those. The visual kids are the ones who like watching the podcast, and they like looking at it. The audio kids, the auditory kids are the ones who listen to the podcast. They might not even watch the video. They just have to listen to the material. The readers, they've got the textbook, they've got my notes. I'm going to start captioning my material. So all of this is much, much easier to provide in terms of the time that it takes to provide it. It does, I'm not going to lie, that first year you're doing it, trying to do this, it takes a ton of time. This is not an easier method to teaching. But after that first year is done, you're going to have a lot more practice with it, and it's just going to be natural. Yesterday when I was talking about this, I was saying, well, yeah, I would just do this, and it felt very natural to me, but I was getting a lot of deer in the headlights because I wasn't explaining it very well, because it's new. Right, so it just, a lot of this does take just doing it and trying new things to get to reach the kids. And again, things that I do in my class are not going to work in your class because we have different students and a different culture and a different environment. So, but we've all seen this, and it's so much easier to hit multiple learning styles. And because I understand my learning style, I'm able to help kids understand theirs. I can sit down with a student and I can have them try and teach me something, and then I can stop and say, wait, I'm not auditory. How can I read this? Or do you have graphs? Do you have information? Do you have something you can show me? Is there something I can do? And it really internalizes for them, and they have to reflect on what works best for them. And I had one student in particular, her name was Yeji. Or her name is Yeji. She took my class last year. And she came up to me during the middle of the first semester. She said, Mr. Bennett, I just don't like watching your videos. I said, okay, what do you like to do? She says, I just want to read the book. I said, okay, great. I hate our textbook, but if you like reading it, that's awesome. And so what she would do when she would come to class is she would grab a textbook off the shelf, put her headphones in, listen to music, and sit in the corner and read the textbook and fill out her notes that way. And that was fine. She learned the material. She did way better than she had been doing trying to watch the podcast because she thought she had to watch the podcasts. The common thread that we're trying to impress upon everyone is that the videos are the least important part of the class. What you do in the class is the most important thing. And so for Yeji, the freedom to just sit and read a textbook was her learning style. And she was able to meet that in my classroom. And yeah.
There are studies, though, that say that students should be pushed into becoming accustomed to other learning styles, because what we are accommodating and providing in our setting isn't what's going to always be available in life.
Yeah, so the comment for the webinar people was, should we be accommodating students all the time, or should we be pushing them to other learning styles? And this is something that came up yesterday, is do we accommodate too much? When does an accommodation turn into a hindrance? Are we accommodating or are we holding them back? And again, that's something that you need to develop. So while I did let her read the textbook, she didn't just sit in the corner for my 80-minute I mean, she was involved in collaboratively working with other students.
But I would also say to that student that yes, you can read the textbook, but I'd also like you to get used to looking at some of the videos, because that's going to be a medium that's not going to go away.
Yeah, sure. And, you know, again, it depends on your climate. And I wasn't limiting what she could do.
Right.
And I would pull and push different students. But, yeah, I think it's a very valid point. When do you draw that line to, because that student is just sitting comfortably where she is. We should be pushing their boundaries. But, yeah, that's a really good point to make. But a lot of that does come from understanding how you learn and helping them understand how they learn. So they can develop that strength, and they can, I would say they should be using that strength not as a primary source, but as a fallback. I guess if you want to try and pull them. So having them continue to watch the videos, but then refer back to the text if they want to clarify a little bit better. So again, understanding her learning is still able to push her, but she's still accommodated and can still learn it the best way that she knows how. So a little bit about me. I haven't really given a bio yet. I worked in South Korea. All of our students in the high school, if they are not already in the school system, working up from elementary, middle, high school, and we had a few students who had been in the school for 13 years, starting in kindergarten, graduating from the school, which is very uncommon. Most of our students hop around a lot. A lot of these kids, 14, 15, have been in 7 or 8 different schools, and that's just the culture of an international student. All of our students, when they apply to our school, they have to be fluent English speakers. So they have to be able to sit in a class and listen and dialogue with the teacher and other students in English, because their parents want them to learn English. That's the whole point. We had rules against their native language being spoken, but that's another point. So they're all fluent English speakers, but they only had to be proficient in reading and writing. They had to be able to write using basic sentence structure. They had to use a vocabulary appropriate for their age. But most of the language acquisition that they had done up until that point was only spoken. Because when you move to a foreign country, you can find things translated into your tongue. South Korea is a very, very international country. There's English, German, Arabic, I mean, you name it, you can probably find it printed. If you're interacting with the culture, though, you need to be able to speak and understand that language. So that's what these kids would focus on to adapt as they moved. So part of our job at the school was to teach them how to read and write academic English. And that was a struggle a lot of the time because they just didn't have the spoken vocabulary connected to their reading vocabulary. Does that make sense? So what I saw the biggest problem in, because I had so much discussion in my class, I was able to connect with those kids. I did not have enough discussion during assessments, though, whether it's formative or whether it's summative. And so that's where most of my changes occurred. And so what I ended up doing is I was targeting students for oral assessments. And I was saying, all right, this kid gets it when I talk to him, and I know he gets it, and he can do the math, and he can talk it through, and he can use the vocab and explain it to me. But when he gets to a test, he chokes because he gets stressed out by the language. He just hasn't made the connection yet, which is fine. It's part of development. And so I focused on the summative assessments. They're a big chunk of their grade, and if you weren't passing those chapter assessments, then your grade is going to fall. And as I was thinking about it and talking with these students about it, I said, you know, it's not fair to them. Because they know the content, and I know they know it, but how can I get that connect to occur? And so I talked to my principal, and I got permission to start doing oral assessments. Because we were a smaller school, we don't have full-time special ed staff. We do in elementary, but it's only for reading and math to try and get those kids if they're going to stay in the school. And so a lot of what I was doing were things that would happen normally, you know, at the drop of a hat in the States because they have an IEP or a 504 that requires it, but in our school that wasn't existent, and so I had to make it up as I went. So I went through 2 steps, and I went through 2 revisions, and so I'm going to kind of talk through those, and this is where I want to spend most of the dialogue. And so what I ended up doing was, because I'm in a mastery system, I had objectives like John and Aaron. So in order for a student to get through a unit, they had to demonstrate certain learning skills or benchmarks, if you want to call them that. And that's kind of what the students this morning had touched on, getting all your benchmarks in. And so, for example, like number 1 there was describe the importance and implications of the kinetic molecular theory of gases, right? Very academic English. And in class, that's easy to describe because I can sit there and say, all right, this really, what it's saying is this. And they say, oh, okay, yeah, I can do that. On a test, though, I didn't have that opportunity. And so what I would do for this was the first iteration of this method, and I just made it up just to try it. And these are available. I'll give you a link to my website, and you can download the second version, which is a little bit more accountable. But anyways, so I just decided that the easiest way to do this was that each category or each objective is 5 points. If they can answer a question or discuss with me without prompting, they get a full 5 points. They know it. If I have to prompt them once, they lose a point. They get a 4 out of 5. If I prompt them twice, 3 out of 5, and so on. And so I can show the relative strength in terms of what they are. The notes at the bottom, this was a full 8.5 by 11. If there was a calculation question, like for number, what's that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, perform calculations with the ideal gas law, I would write the question on the paper, and they would solve it on the paper. And then we would grade it on that paper. And when we were done, they get a total out of 40. I'd photocopy it and hand it to the student. And that's their record of the exam. So if they got a 5 out of 5 for a category, they knew it, and they didn't need to go back and restudy it. If they got a 3 or a 4 out of 5, I would make a note at why they got that point taken off, and they would go back and study that point. And then the math was there again, so they could work through their problems again and just visually look at it. And what I found was that the students that were having the hardest time the reading, the math was no problem. They rarely lost points on the math because it was just very algorithmic and logical in that sense. But the contextual stuff was very, very difficult for them. And so I did this for a couple chapters, and my principal said, okay, how can we make this more accountable? Because if I sat down with this student, I wouldn't know if they knew it or not. And I said, okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've worked with my kids every single day. I know if they know it or not using this. And so our middle school principal, or our middle school assistant principal, was a special ed supervisor. At a school in the States, so I sat down with him and we came up with this. And this works very, very similar to the other one. It's still on a 5-point scale, but now instead of saying subjectively, does my kid know it, now we've got basic criteria that we're trying to match. So notice at the 5, it says no prompting from the teacher. That's the first thing. If they can answer a question without a prompt, that's fine with me. I know they know it. But I'm also looking for unit vocabulary. Do they have that language acquisition? Are they building that academic vocabulary that I want them to be learning with the content? Is their response concise and accurate? When I ask them a question, can they recall the information and explain it correctly and without getting kind of too tangent-y, if that makes sense. And then the last one, the outside related information is clearly connected to the response. I only included that because I teach outside information. I want them to connect to the real world.
With the second one down with the unit vocabulary, do you prompt them and let them know, okay, in your explanation, I'd like to use these terms?
I don't. But when I give them this rubric, they also get, with their packet, the objectives, and the unit vocabulary on that page. So they know which terms I'm looking for. So they prompt, their response is concise and the outside related information, but they don't use a vocabulary, that's not mastery because they're missing a component of what I am trying to get them to do. So they would get a 4 out of 5 out of that component. So it's not a major doc. They don't get it completely wrong like you would if you did a vocab multiple choice. But they're still rewarded for what they do know. Most of the time, they would do fine. They would get a above a 75. I held them to that same standard the first time through. There were a couple as we got through the unit, or excuse me, not through the unit, through the year, where a student would do poorly, and they would get 65, 70%. I would copy the first rubric, hand it to them, say, okay, take anything you got a 3 or lower on. Study that stuff and come back and we'll do it again. And then they bring the rubric back. I would mark it up in a different color, photocopy it. I've got a record. They have a record of where they improved. And now I can throw this in my file and I can say, all right, when Brian was doing this test, this is what he did poorly the first time. Here's how he improved the second time. Documentation, he's got it. I've got it. And so again, students that come into, or parents that come into these meetings, parent-teacher conferences, like say, look what Brian can do. If he's having a hard time in other classes, that might be because of this, and it's something that you might want to talk to their teacher about. But I always try and show success. And when that student finds the success, when they've been struggling for test after test after test, man, it's like it's a total switch in attitude, and it's amazing. And I mean, it's just unbelievable some of the changes that I saw this year just by doing this one simple thing. And this is the biggest accommodation that I made all year, but it hit those 4 or 5 kids that would have fallen through the cracks. And again, it is still putting the importance of the material onto them, and I did have students that chose not to do this. I had one, I was ready to go, the whole 10 yards with him, but he wasn't willing to meet me there, and he ended up failing the class. but it's still the student's decision to do. But my job is to meet them where they are. And that's what we should all be trying to do. So any questions, any thoughts on this? I'm curious to hear feedback.
People online love the rubric.
Okay. And I'll give everyone a link to my website where you can download this copy of the rubric. I have it as a PDF and a Word document. And that document that you can download, it has instructions for you using the rubric. It has example objectives, and it's got this.